My eardrums, you couldn't get a smaller gong? No, okay, yeah. Funny pharaohs. Around 5500 BC, the awesome Egyptians moved into the land by the River Nile. Every year the river flooded and left lovely squidgy mud covering the fields for a few miles on either side. Lovely squidgy mud that was good for growing crops. The people of the Nile would usually grow enough food to live, but they were always worried that one year the Nile would let them down and they'd all starve. So they invented gods and prayed that the gods would make the Nile flood. Then along came some really clever leaders who said, "Actually, we are those gods you pray to, so give us lots of food, build us palaces, worship us, and we'll look after you, eh?" These really clever people became known as pharaohs, probably because they had a pharaoh life. No, that's not true. Pharaoh is the Egyptian word for great house. The peasants didn't dare to speak the name of their king, so they called him the Great House, a bit like calling the Queen Mrs. Buckingham Palace, or an American calling the President Mr. White House. We don't know a lot about the early pharaohs, but there are a few bits of horrible history we can find in their powerful pasts. One of the earliest pharaohs was Narmer. How did he get to be pharaoh? By being super unpharaoh. In fact, he was super cruel. The Egyptians left pictures of Narmer showing him holding a prisoner on the end of a rope. And the rope had been pushed through a hole in the prisoner's nose. Who knows how Narmer got his power? I knows. There are pictures of his enemies lying on the ground. Have they just nodded off? No, because they're headless. Sort of noddle off. But remember, there were no sharp steel swords and axes in Egypt. Having your head cut off with a soft copper blade would be slower and more painful than a quick chop. Then along came Djoser. He's important because he built the first of the Great Pyramids. He died and was made into a mummy. But Djoser was king of both Upper and Lower Egypt. To keep both parts happy, he had to be buried in a north tomb and a south tomb. His body was buried in one tomb, but his liver, stomach, guts and lungs were buried in a separate tomb. He was buried with food for the afterlife. But imagine what happened when his spirit got hungry. It sits up in the afterlife and says, "Oh, where's me dinner?" And there, on the table, he finds a dead cow. He says, "Yummy cow burger." Then he looks down and says, "Hang on, where's me stomach?" He'd have to go for a spooky stroll to the South Temple, pick up his stomach, slap it back in, then go back to the North Temple for his grub. When he'd finished, he'd have to drop his stomach off at the South Temple and... oh, you get the idea. Imagine sitting down to a school dinner and then having to cross the school playing fields and back to get your stomach. You'd be gutted. Oh, and the next pharaoh I want to tell you about is Khufu. Khufu has the biggest pyramid, the biggest ships in Egypt, and the biggest statue. Not exactly a statue of Khufu, but Khufu's face is on the face of the monster Sphinx statue near his pyramid. You may not like to have your face stuck on a monster, but hey, maybe it already is. Well, when Khufu was dead, his son had 2 ships buried beside his pyramid. The ships were found in 30-metre pits, and the ships were over 40 metres long. "Hang on," you say. "Hang on a minute." Then you say, "If the ships are 40 metres long, then they won't fit a pit that's 30 metres long. Ha ha! Horrible history's got it wrong." Of course, there's a simple answer. The ships were taken apart before they were buried. What was found was a ship kit pit. Try saying that with a mouthful of marshmallows. The spirit of the ship would carry the spirit of Khufu to the afterlife. Of course, we don't know why they were buried a few years after Khufu, or why there were 2. There's a famous story about Pharaoh Khufu, But just because the stories from ancient Egypt were written down, it doesn't mean they were true. One day, Khufu called for his top slave. "There you are, slave." "Yes, boss." "How's my pyramid going along?" the pharaoh asked. "Is it going to be the greatest pyramid ever built?" But Meria had some bad news. "Oh, it's not coming along at all, boss. The workers won't work because you've run out of money to pay them." Khufu was furious. "Egyptian curses! What am I to do? It's only half finished. There's no point in having a pyramid without a point. I'll be dead soon." But Meria had an idea. "Oh, tell you what, boss. I've heard about a bloke called Jedi. He says he's a magician who can bring people back to life. He could keep you going long enough to get your pyramid finished." "Good thinking," Khufu said. "I'm glad I thought of it. Said for Jedi." Meria warned him, "If you ask me, he's a bit of a fake. If you ask me, he just does tricks." "Well, I'm not asking you," Khufu snapped. "Send for him." So, a bit later, Jedi the magic man arrived at the palace. Meria was there with a warning. "You're for it, sunshine. The boss wants you to prove you can bring something back to life, or you'll be bringing yourself back to life." Jedi expected that, and he didn't look too bothered. "I have a goose here in this box. Killed it this morning." And he lifted a headless goose out of the box. Meria licked his lips. Very tasty. After you've brought it back to life, you can kill it again, and I'll have it for me supper." Just then, in walked Khufu. "Are you the magician, chappie?" "I am Jedi, the greatest magician the world has ever seen." "You'll be the richest magician the world's ever seen if you can bring the dead back to life." Jedi held up the goose. "I have here a dead goose." But Khufu wasn't going to be fooled by some conjurer's trick. He said, "Never mind the goose. Fetch me a prisoner. We'll kill him and let Jedi here bring him back to life." Jedi looked worried. "Oh, you can't do that. No, you can't. It's against the law. Just let me show you what I can do with this dead goose." "Oh, go on then. A bit boring, but go on." Jedi put the goose in its box and closed the lid. He waved his hands over the box, then pulled out a live goose. Khufu was impressed. "Great stuff! Come back when I'm dead and do the same for me. I'll reward you with riches beyond your dreams." And Khufu went off happy, but Meria wasn't fooled. "Oh, he nearly caught you there, sunshine. I mean, the live goose was in the box all the time. I'm not stupid like the king, you know. He'll have you executed if he ever finds out." "You won't tell him." "I might, unless—" What? What do you want?" Meria smacked his lips. "And that a dead goose for me supper." "It's a deal, Meria." And that's the story of how a sly serving slave came to get himself a great goose supper.